Coming up today, registration begins for general elections some 4 months away. But Korea's rival parties still can't agree on how to redraw the nation's electoral districts. Korea and Japan failed to resolve their differences during another round of director-level talks on Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Plus, schools in Los Angeles have been shut as police investigate an unspecified but credible threat emailed to the school district. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, December 16th here in Seoul. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, candidates in Korea have begun registering for the general election set for April next year. But even as they do so, rival party leaders are still trying to reach a compromise on redrawing electoral districts. It's widely believed the talks could drag on until at least the end of the year. Our National Assembly correspondent Ji Myung-gil starts us off.
Korea's two main rival parties wrapped up another round of talks on redrawing the nation's electoral map without a solution. The ruling Saenuri Party slammed the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy for the failure.
If the NPAD doesn't want to be remembered as the worst political party ever, they'd better work towards progress on the redistricting issue. The issue must be resolved to make it easier for newcomers planning to run in the general elections next year.
There is concern that those who participated in early candidate registration on Tuesday could be at a disadvantage in launching their campaigns. If they register their candidacies in areas subject to redistricting, their campaigns could be invalidated when the electoral map changes. Earlier in the day, National Assembly Speaker Chung Lee-hwa had called a meeting of rival party leaders in an effort to move them toward a compromise. Calling the matter a legislative emergency, he indicated he would step in if the parties fail to find a solution by the end of the year. The NPAD objected immediately, saying he had overreached.
It wouldn't be right for Speaker Chung to exercise his authority to resolve the restricting issue that goes against the principle of parliamentary sovereignty.
The redistricting issue arose following a ruling by the Constitutional Court last year that said the current electoral map is unconstitutional because it perpetuates unequal representation due to changes in the population. The main sticking point between the rival parties is whether or not to decrease the number of proportional representatives. The only thing they've agreed on so far is to keep the number of assembly seats at the current 300. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, Ahn Cheol-soo, the man in the headlines for quitting the Liberal Party he helped co-found, is making his way around Korea to drum up support for his plans to go it alone and start his own party. Pundits predict at least 10 NPAD lawmakers will follow him and defect from the party, and says he's also looking for new faces with a passion for reform. Lee Soo-eun has this report.
Former opposition leader Ahn Cheol-soo has already taken his political comeback tour on the road, following his departure from the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy party. On Tuesday, Ahn traveled to Korea's southern port city of Busan, where he told local reporters he's seeking to build a new party of talented individuals, even if they lean conservative, as long as they're interested in his reform agenda and fulfill 3 criteria: be against corruption, self-contradiction, and extreme conservatism. Last Sunday, Ahn quit the party he co-founded after his efforts to reform the party and get the current leader Moon Jae-in to resign failed to gain momentum. While it's unclear what effect his departure will have on the political landscape, new polling suggests that it could spell trouble for the opposition, which suffered crushing defeats in the last 2 by-elections. In a nationwide poll by local polling agency Realmeter regarding Ahn's departure from the NPAD, almost half of the respondents said they approved of his decision. However, in the southern provinces of Jeollabuk-do and Jeollanam-do, considered a hotbed of support for the liberal camp, the positive response fell short of 35%. Analysts say that the result illustrates a regional concern over a potential splitting of the Liberal vote that could lead to defeat in next year's general elections in April. Lee Soo-in, Arirang News.
Now, Korea and Japan have once again failed to resolve the issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of tens of thousands of Korean women before and during World War II. Tuesday's meeting was likely the last between the two sides this year, meaning they'll miss a verbal deadline set by President Park Geun-hye made during her recent summit talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Kwon-soo reports.
It was already the 11th round of talks, meant to get South Korea and Japan on the same page toward resolving the issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. But at Tuesday's meeting in Tokyo, the two sides failed once again to find common ground. Seoul's Foreign Ministry's Northeast Asian Bureau Chief Lee Sang-duk, Korea's representative to the talks, told reporters after the meeting with his Japanese counterpart Kimihiro Ishikane that at this stage it was difficult to say that the talks were productive, but also hard to say they were not.
Seoul wants to see an early conclusion of the negotiations, but whether another round can be held this year has to be analyzed once the delegation returns to Korea.
While Seoul has been pushing for a formal apology and compensation from Japan for the sexual enslavement of Korean women, Japan wants to approach the issue on a purely humanitarian level. Tokyo claims that the issue was settled under a 1965 bilateral treaty that normalized relations between the two countries. Despite the fact there's been no major progress on the matter since the first talks were held in April last year, expectations for Tuesday's meeting were higher than usual. That's because the meeting came just 2 weeks before the end of the year and after President Park Geun-hye had called for greater momentum toward a resolution by the end of this year during her first summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in November. Even if Japan does apologize, only 46 out of the 238 Korean victims registered as so-called comfort women are still alive today to hear that apology after one of them died earlier this month. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Now, all public schools in the Los Angeles area have been closed for the day because of a security threat. The announcement affects more than 1,000 schools and some 650,000 students. Police say a credible electronic threat had been received from a foreign country and all schools would be searched. Officials in New York City said they received a similar threat but deemed it was a hoax. California is on edge following the deaths of 14 people in San Bernardino, 100 kilometers east of LA, in a shooting carried out by a married couple thought to have been inspired by the Islamic State group. Top officials at the US Federal Reserve have begun a two-day policy meeting amid widespread speculation that they are set to raise interest rates for the first time in nearly a decade. 10 policymakers of the Federal Open Market Committee are discussing the unemployment situation, inflation and the global economy to determine if the US economy can cope with a rate hike. Most economists do expect the Fed to raise its benchmark rate by 0.25 percentage point from the current near-zero level. With liftoff looming, a new survey shows 4 in 10 experts believe the process of rate normalization will end badly for the US economy. According to the CNBC Fed survey, 44% saw a rate hike as neutral, while just 13% believed it would end well. The rate decision will be released on Thursday at 4 a.m. Korea time, and it will be followed by a news conference by Fed Chair Janet Yellen, where she will elaborate on the latest policy. Now, it's one of the biggest steps yet towards ending sanctions on Iran. The United Nations nuclear body has decided to close its investigation of Tehran's past nuclear activities. In a report Tuesday, the International Atomic Energy Agency said there was no credible indications of activities in Iran relevant to the development of a nuclear explosive device after 2009. It also found that many allegations on Iran's nuclear history are baseless. Experts say the report essentially means Western countries have no good reason to delay the lifting of sanctions on Iran in line with the landmark agreement reached in Vienna earlier this year. Given that investigations into Iran's past are now closed, the IAEA's key responsibility now is to verify Tehran's current and future nuclear activity. The European Union and members of the European Parliament are expected to agree on a new data protection law governing the use of personal data. Under the new rules, companies would have to report privacy breaches to authorities or face stiff sanctions. Ahn Cheol-soo has this report.
After 4 years of deliberations and negotiations, the European Union is finally looking to update its current data privacy law that has been in place since the 90s. The reformed law will require internet companies to not only give users greater information on how personal data will be used, but also get their consent to use it. The age of consent will be raised from 13 to 16, with younger users needing parental permission to share personal information. The law also aims to deter companies from hiding cyber attacks. Data breaches will need to be alerted to national authorities within 72 hours. Failure to disclose the information could cost the infringing company a fine of around 4% of its global revenue. For internet giants like Google and Facebook, that could mean billions of dollars. But there is an upside. Currently, all 28 EU members have their own individual data protection laws. The new reform plans to bring them all together under one regulator or a one-stop shop, instead of dealing with every EU national authority individually.
Fines and sanctions will become stricter, putting internet companies under greater pressure. But when dealing with the EU bloc as a whole, it should be simpler and clearer.
Still, experts warn that care needs to be taken.
When collecting and using information from people in the EU, Korean companies will have to be stringent on whether it complies with the new regulations. Consultation with law experts will likely be necessary.
Once the regulation is signed off, internet companies will have 2 years to come into compliance. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, NASA has released global satellite maps of air quality indicators. Scientists tracked air pollution trends over the last decade in various regions and cities across the globe. According to the map, the United States and Europe have improved air quality between 2005 and 2014 due to emission control regulations. You're looking at the map there. However, as you can see, fast-growing economies like China, India, and the Middle East saw an increase of as much as 50% in nitrogen dioxide, which is a yellow-brown gas. That's a common emission from cars, power plants, and industrial activity. Major urban areas, including Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo, saw a high nitrogen dioxide level, severely affecting air quality in the process. Now, with the rapid rise of single households here in Korea and around the world as well, loneliness has become a growing public health concern. And now there's scientific evidence which shows that not having anyone to speak to or lean on in difficult times can damage one's physical health. Park Se-young has this report.
Staying social is not only good for one's emotional health, it can also protect you from getting sick. According to a recent study supported by the National Institutes of Health, loneliness can increase the risk of premature death in older adults by 14%. Researchers from the University of Chicago studied the physical health of 141 participants aged 50 to 68 and surveyed them annually for a decade to observe their levels of loneliness and social isolation. They found that the feeling of loneliness reduces the amount of white blood cells in the body. Fewer white blood cells reduce the body's power to fight infection.
Chronic loneliness has the effect of stress on our body, which reduces the function of white blood cells and weakens the immune system.
Feeling lonely can also put the body into a state of nervousness.
It has the same effect as being in constant excitement, which can increase the risks for cardiovascular diseases and result in a higher risk of death in the long run.
For many years, researchers have known of greater risks of illnesses and premature death in people who perceive themselves as lonely. The findings published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences provide a huge base for future research. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Wednesday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Have a great day. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. And we do hope to see you throughout the day for the rest of our newscasts and also at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.